Most people think investigators look for lies. We don't. We look for friction. The places where a story can't hold its own weight, because here's the truth: most people aren't trying to fool an investigator. They're trying to fool themselves first. And once you understand how friction works, you can see the truth in almost any situation. Coworkers, interviews, relationships, even your own decisions. I've spent over 20 years investigating everything from everyday crimes to major fraud rings to workplace injury cases to complex SIU work where even one detail could change the entire outcome. Across all those cases, I learned something simple but powerful. People reveal the truth the same way, and they hide it the same way. And once you know the patterns, you can't unsee them. So in this series, I'm going to teach you the 4 mental models every investigator relies on. Not the TV version, not the movie version, the actual thinking patterns that cut through confusion, over-explaining, polished stories, and even confidence. You'll learn pattern recognition, what truth naturally looks like, contradictions and story tension, where stories break, timeline logic, why lies collapse under time pressure, weak spot testing, how to stress a story without confrontation. These are the tools that help you understand what's real, not just what's being said. By the end of this long form, you'll start seeing people differently, not suspiciously, but clearly, the way investigators do. Let's start with the first mental model: pattern recognition. Most people think lying is about creating a story, but investigators know the real giveaway is the pattern behind the story. Every human has a natural rhythm when they're telling the truth. Some people talk fast, some slow down, some ramble a bit, some give short answers. It doesn't matter what the pattern is. What matters is that it's consistent when the person is being honest. This is what investigators call a baseline. It's the person's natural way of recalling real events. Now, here's the key. When someone lies, they don't create a new pattern. They break their old one. A story that should be simple suddenly becomes rehearsed. A person who normally pauses now fires back instantly. Someone who's usually descriptive suddenly becomes vague, or the opposite. They start throwing in way too many unnecessary details. Those are pattern breaks. They're the first sign the story needs a closer look. Let me give you a simple example. Imagine someone repeating the exact same sentence 3 different times, word for word. People don't do that when they're speaking from memory. They do it when they've practiced the line. That doesn't mean they're guilty, but it does mean they're controlling the story instead of recalling it. Truth comes out naturally, with small imperfections. Lies come out smoother, because the person is working to make the story feel right instead of letting it be right. Pattern recognition isn't about catching someone. It's about recognizing when the flow of their story shifts away from who they normally are. And once you see it, you can't miss it. Now, let's move into the second mental model: contradictions and story tension. A story is like a bridge. If it's built on truth, it naturally holds its own weight. If it's not, you start to feel tension in the structure, even when the storyteller sounds confident. This tension comes from contradictions, and investigators look for 2 kinds. The first is an internal contradiction. That's when a story breaks against itself. Someone says they were calm, but later says they were panicking. They claim they went straight home, but then mention a stop they forgot about. The pieces don't fight an outside fact. They fight each other. Internal contradictions are powerful because they reveal a struggle inside the storyteller. They're trying to manage the narrative instead of remembering the event. The second kind is an external contradiction. That's when a story breaks against reality, the timeline, the environment, or information we already know. Someone says a store was open, but we know it was closed. They say they were home at 8, but their phone shows movement across town. One contradiction doesn't prove anything, but tension in the story tells you exactly where to look next. And here's something most people don't realize. Over-explaining is its own form of contradiction, because the more a person tries to prove their story, the less natural the story becomes. Truth doesn't need supporting beams every 5 seconds. it stands by itself. But when someone keeps reinforcing their narrative with extra commentary, side details, or emotional justification, the structure bends under its own weight. That bending is the tension investigators feel instantly. Contradictions don't always mean someone is lying. People misremember things all the time. But when the story fights itself or fights reality, the tension gives you a starting point for deeper questions. And that leads us directly into the third mental model, timeline logic. Why lies collapse under time pressure? A truthful timeline has a natural shape. It isn't perfect. It isn't polished. But it always connects. Real memories anchor themselves to moments. What happened right before, what happened right after, and what stood out emotionally. Those anchors create a natural structure without the person having to think about it. But when someone lies, the timeline works differently. Instead of being built from memory, it's built from sequence, a mental checklist of what they think should have happened. And that's where the cracks appear. A fabricated timeline is too smooth, too complete, too linear. It flows like a script instead of a memory. People telling the truth jump around slightly. They remember a sound, a conversation, a small detail that stood out, then jump back to the main sequence. People telling a lie stick to the path too tightly because they're afraid to wander off the script. Here's an example. Someone says, "I drove straight home." Sounds simple, right? But a truthful memory of that drive usually includes an anchor. Traffic, a stoplight, a slow driver, a song on the radio, something. When those anchors are missing or feel forced, the timeline starts to float. And once the timeline floats, the whole story becomes vulnerable to pressure. One question, just one, can collapse the sequence because the person has no real memory to fall back on. They only have the script. Timeline logic is one of the most reliable tools investigators use because real life always leaves a trail. Real memories connect. Fabricated ones drift. And that brings us to the fourth mental model, the part where timelines, contradictions, and patterns all come together. Weak spot testing. Most people imagine investigators as aggressive, pushing, confronting, challenging every detail. But that's not what real investigators do. We don't attack a story. We test it. A weak spot is any point in the story where the person is relying on memory they don't actually have or control they can't maintain. And when you apply the right kind of pressure, even lightly, the entire narrative can shift. Here's how it works. When someone is telling the truth, their story may be imperfect, but it's solid. If you press a detail, they pull from real memory. They might pause, but the answer comes naturally. When someone isn't telling the truth, they don't have memory, they have a script, and scripts fall apart under pressure. The goal isn't to confront them, it's to tap the weak joint gently and see how the structure reacts. You might ask, "Walk me through that part one more time, but slower." Or, "What happened right before that?" Or, "What made you remember that detail specifically?" If the story's real, the person leans back into memory. If the story is fabricated, they hesitate, repeat themselves, or shift to new filler details because they've reached the edge of their script. You're not breaking the story. The story breaks itself once you touch the weak spot. I've seen entire cases turn on a single question, not because the question was complex, but because it landed on the exact part of the narrative the person couldn't support. Weak spot. Testing isn't about catching someone in a lie. It's about revealing where the story can no longer stand on its own. And once you see that moment, even once, you start seeing it everywhere. Now let's finish strong by bringing all four mental models together and showing how you can use them in everyday life. You don't have to be an investigator to use these mental models. Once you understand them, they follow you into everyday life, and suddenly things start making a lot more sense. If you're a parent, you'll notice the difference between a kid recalling what happened and a kid managing a story. If you're in a relationship, you'll feel when the timeline is drifting or when details are suddenly too polished. If you're a leader or manager, you'll start picking up on pattern breaks. The moment someone shifts away from their usual behavior because something underneath changed. If you negotiate or work with clients, you'll see when the story fights itself, when someone is over-explaining or when they're leaning too hard on a rehearsed sequence. These mental models aren't about turning you into a suspicious person. They're about helping you stay calm and clear so you can separate what's real from what's being performed in conversations, decisions, and interactions. Because once you understand pattern recognition, contradictions and story tension, timeline logics, and weak spot testing, you stop reacting to the surface of a story and you start understanding the structure underneath it. That's what investigators see, and that's what I want to teach you. If you want to sharpen your judgment, think more clearly, and understand people with real accuracy, subscribe and follow the Red Flag series. We're just getting started.